because I was involved in those a lot every year for many, many years. We had a great street saying a common demographic. We all moved there together, the kids grew up together. And we participated in a lot of things like that, with our neighbors. One key to that one in particular, to many of the things we did, is that we had to have a leader to do that for us. My neighbor, right next to me, in fact, for that particular event was the person that drove us all to do it. And it wouldn't have happened without him. And that's really, I think, what we're talking about now with the Green Party. We need, and we can see this in politics in particular. If you don't have a good leader, you might as well hold up your tent. I think we do have a good leader politically in Mike Schreiner in Ontario. And we have to get that message out. Mike's really impressed me. I know a little bit about his background from his bio on the internet. He's a successful businessman and entrepreneur, now based in Guelph. And he's had several award-winning projects, including Local Food Plus. Right? Is that still going strong? Right, still going strong. And I've been impressed with how he's taken on some of the issues that really are fundamental again to Guelph, like water. The water issue in Guelph. Mike has been the champion for that, to try and protect Guelph water from really aggressive development by industry, by quarry. So that's been very impressive to me. But Mike is the leader, and he's the leader we need. And I'm really anxiously looking forward to hear what he has to say tonight. Mike.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. And it's great to be in Markham Unionville. And it's partly amazing to be here because Peter mentioned my work with Local Food Plus. And one of my fondest memories of my days at Local Food Plus was how often I came to Markham, of all places, believe it or not. And so it was sort of coming down memory lane as I was making the trip from Guelph, and I got off the highway. I was taking Highway 7 to make my way over here. And how many times I drove that stretch to Markham City Hall. And Markham can be proud of the fact, the thing I was working on, something I think Markham can be very proud of. Markham's the first city in Canada, actually, that made a substantial commitment to buying local sustainable food for all of its city facilities. And so I think that says a lot about this community. I think it says a lot about the vision of the municipal government here. But obviously, they wouldn't have had that vision if people in the community didn't support that. And so I think a lot of the projects that Miles talked about, that provides the foundation for political leaders to then stand up and take bold action, like becoming the first city in Canada to make a commitment to buying local sustainable food. And so it was a lot of fun to come here and try to reflect on that a little bit. But it also gave me an opportunity to reflect a bit on the Green Party. And the one thing I want to say, and I know when I walked in there, I was like, oh, Mike, there aren't as many people here as I hoped. And it's actually a pretty good crowd. So don't feel like you should feel happy, eh? You should feel happy. Sometimes people ask, does the Green Party make a difference? Like really, you guys put a lot of work into this. Are you making a difference? And I want to tell you fundamentally how we're making a difference on some really important issues and some ways in which we've concretely done that. But I want to preface it by saying that one of the articles that was written last fall that I'm incredibly proud of was one that came out in a publication called Briefing, which unfortunately costs $2,000 to get a subscription. So it's mostly, government relations people and people who work at Queen's Park. So it doesn't get distributed as widely as, maybe the Toronto Star or something, even though it's owned by the Toronto Star. But they had a headline, an article last fall that said, Schreiner's had a bigger impact on public policy than Hudak. And I realize that bar is set pretty low. So I should have bragged too much about this headline. But the reason they wrote that was because I made the case to them that even without an MPP, the Green Party is making a substantial impact on public policy in Ontario. And we haven't taken the approach that the Conservatives have taken, which is just to oppose everything. Instead, we've said, there are certain things that we hold dear, there's certain priorities we have, and we're going to fight for those. And we're going to engage people in our communities in grassroots organizing and make it happen. And I'm going to give you a few concrete examples. The first one is in the summer of 2012, the Liberal government, we always hear about Harper's omnibus budget, but actually the Liberals brought in an omnibus budget that affected 65 pieces of legislation that had nothing to do with budgets. 11 of those were important pieces of environmental legislation, including the Endangered Species Act, which was going to be gutted if that legislation passed. And within 48 hours, about 6,000 Green Party members signed a petition to save the Endangered Species Act. And we sent that to the government, and one of the important changes, revisions they made to that legislation was actually to take out the part about gutting the Endangered Species Act. And that wouldn't have happened if people like all of you in this room hadn't taken action to make it happen. And one of the ways in which we can make things like that happen is by the way in which we grow capacity in our party. So when I first became leader, I guess what, 4.5 years ago now, we had about 2,000 names in our database. We now have like 90,000 names of supporters. Our fundraising has increased by over 300%, so we now actually have the financial capacity to do things to mobilize those volunteers. And so when something like the Endangered Species Act comes up, we can actually get signatures on a petition and quickly get that to the government and make a difference. And we wouldn't be able to do that if it wouldn't have been for the really hard work that a lot of you have done, and in particular, Miles, the hard work that our candidates did in the 2011 election to provide that base of support. So I want to thank you for all the work you've done as a candidate, and I want to thank everybody in the room for all the great work you've done as volunteers to make that happen. So thank you. So the second one I want to talk about, and I won't go through every single example, because it's too big of a list. when you're doing more than UDAC is. So the second one was the Harper government, about 1.5 years ago, decided they wanted to spend $50 million to save $2 million a year. Believe it or not, I don't know how the math works. I always thought conservatives were supposed to be good at math. I don't know. In this case, I don't think the math works. But they proposed killing the experimental lakes area, which is an incredibly important research region in northwestern Ontario, where things like acid rain was discovered, where some of the leading freshwater research in the world takes place. And they were going to destroy it, just kill it. And so we initiated a petition drive to save the experimental lakes area. And again, we collected 5,000 or 6,000 signatures in a matter of 2 or 3 days. And I went and met with the Premier personally. And I'll give Kathleen Wynne credit. She actually had a formal sit-down meeting in her office with the leader of the Green Party of Ontario, at a very challenging time when, it's lead up to the budget and whether the government's going to fall or not. She took the time to meet with us. I met with her on a Thursday, and on the following Tuesday, she announced that the province would step in and save the experimental lakes area. And it wasn't just the Green Party. I mean, there were scientists mobilizing and community groups mobilizing. But I was told by her staff that one of the sort of tipping points was when the leader of one of the opposition parties actually came in and said, here's 6,000 signatures to save the experimental lakes. And so Ontario stepped in and saved the experimental lakes. And that deal actually finally was finalized about 10 days ago. And so that research can now continue into how do we keep our water fresh and clean. And so for me, that's an example of what we can accomplish without a seat in the legislature. So imagine what we could accomplish with even one voice at Queen's Park. Think about all we've accomplished with 0, and HUDAC has over 30 MPPs. Imagine what we could do with one voice. And so that's one of the things that drives me to work so hard to elect our first Green MPP. And I'm partly driven, and I see a lot of kids in the audience tonight, which is great. I have 2 daughters, 14 and 8, and I look at some of the challenges we're facing, and I look at the world that they're likely to inherit. And I say to myself, when I look them in the eye, I want to be able to say that I did everything I could to leave a better world for you. And that's the legacy I want to leave for my kids. I believe that's the legacy the Green Party is fighting to leave for all kids. And we're fighting for that really around trying to do everything we can to protect the people in the places we love. And I think that's good work. And we're going to focus that work in the next legislative session on 3 critically important areas. And the first one is creating jobs, creating local, meaningful jobs that transform our economy and help address some of the biggest challenges we face. And I think that starts by making our local economies more resilient, by supporting the small and medium-sized businesses that are the backbone of our local economy, that help create the kinds of walkable communities and commercial areas that you have right here in Unionville. And so I think that's an important first step, but it's not enough. I believe Ontario has the opportunity to say, you know what, the whole world's talking about climate change. And yet, we don't even talk about it here in Ontario. Like, it's as if the IPCC report that came out last week saying this is the decade for action didn't even register in this province. And yet, if we take action on climate change, which, by the way, the insurance industry said that their costs related to extreme weather was over $3 billion last year. So the thing that's driving insurance rates in this province is no longer theft and crime. It's actually climate change. It's extreme weather events. So imagine if we put the same amount of energy into tackling climate change that the federal government puts into, tackling crime, or what supposedly is a crime like epidemic. But in Ontario, we have the opportunity to turn climate change from being a challenge into a huge opportunity. The largest growth sector in the global economy is in clean tech innovation. And we have the opportunity to be global leaders in things like energy efficiency and conservation, in renewable energy production, in water conservation and water purification, in electric vehicles and low emission vehicles, and in advanced manufacturing. And if you look at other places around the world, they're revitalizing their manufacturing sectors through clean tech innovation. And I believe Ontario is perfectly positioned to do that. So why do we give tax breaks to things like mining companies, but we don't give tax breaks to clean tech companies? And that's something the Green Party is going to fight to change. Go ahead. And finally, if you think about it, and boy, I felt it driving here tonight, believe me, the 401, I couldn't believe how busy the 401 was on a Saturday night at 6 o'clock. Like, where are all these people going, It was crazy. Gridlock costs the GTA's economy $6 billion a year in lost productivity, and that's going to increase by the end of the decade to $20 or $15 billion if things don't change. And so the Green Party is going to fight for a transportation plan that prioritizes investment in public transit over new highways. We're going to fight for revenue tools to properly fund that plan. And I think it's sad in Ontario right now that the NDP, and I got to take my NDP friends to task on this, are threatening to bring the budget down and vote against the budget because they refuse to support revenue tools to fund transit. And I believe that type of short-sightedness is exactly what Carol Gore is saying has to end in Ontario. For decades now, we have failed to adequately fund transit in this province. And that has to end if we're going to solve our economic challenges and our other challenges like climate change and pollution. And the Green Party is absolutely committed to fighting public transit in this province. Finally, in the economics, one of the things that's driving me nuts right now is all the hydro gimmicks that are happening out there. Everyone is saying, geez, Ontario is, Tim Hudak went out and said, the reason the plant in Leamington closed was due to rising hydro rates. I actually just met somebody today who installed a combined heat and power unit in the Heinz plant in Leamington and told me they actually produce all their own electricity for that plant. Now that's a solution. That's the solution to our rising energy prices. And so what we're going to advocate for, first of all, I just want to advocate for honesty and integrity when it comes to what's driving up electricity prices. You know, the Ontario Energy Board says 46% of the increase in your electricity prices is due to cost overruns from nuclear, and 6% due to green energy. Anybody who reads the newspapers or listens to talk radio would say it's exactly the opposite. So first of all, an honest conversation about it, but second of all, we're going to fight to prevent this province from wasting billions on refurbishing Darlington when there are cheaper and cleaner alternatives to investing in new nuclear in this province. So we can do a deal with Quebec Hydro right now for excess water power to replace 75% of Darlington. We can do it at a cheaper price, and we can save $1 billion a year. Can you imagine what we could do with $1 billion? We're going to propose retrofitting 1 million homes. So you can save money by saving energy, and our businesses can save money by saving energy and be more competitive in a global world with rising energy prices. Those are the kinds of solutions, not the Liberals taking 10% off of your electricity bill at a cost of $1.1 billion, or the NDP trying to up the ante and take $100 off of it at a cost of $440 million a year. Meanwhile, they say we can't afford to fund social welfare programs and things like that to actually help people get out of poverty. I think that's wrong, and it's those misguided priorities that we need a voice at Queen's Park to stand up and speak out for. Which leads me to our second priority, which is focusing in on education and childhood poverty. I think it's time in the 21st century for us to merge the best of the public and Catholic school systems into one single public system and take the $1.5 billion of savings and putting it in our kids' classrooms. I don't want to see any more schools closed. I don't want to see any more education assistants laid off. I don't want to see students not have access to special programming when we're wasting $1.5 billion in duplicate administration rather than putting it in our kids' classrooms. And I know Mary, you want to clap. Go ahead. Don't stop for me. And I think it's wrong that we're spending $1.1 billion to take 10% off of people's electricity bills, especially when I would call that a tax cut for the rich, because think about it, who uses the most electricity in our society? It's the people with big homes and lots of gadgets, and by the way, your discount goes up the more electricity you use, so it's just crazy. So I would rather have us not do that, and then we've got and spend $340 million of that on actually fully funding the recommendations around welfare reform in the clawbacks for people who are on social assistance and try to go to work and then have their benefits clawed back. I think there's so much higher priorities like that to spend that money on. And our third priority is that I think it's time to permanently protect prime farmland and sourced water regions in this province. And Markham, again, has worked hard to try to take the lead on that issue. I know it's been very controversial here. But here's the bottom line. 5% of Ontario's land is suitable for growing food. Think about it, 5%. Half of 1% is prime farmland. And yet we're losing 365 acres of farmland every day in this province. That, on an annualized basis, is equivalent to the size of the city of Toronto. If this continues, by 2025, we won't be able to feed ourselves in Ontario. And so it's time to put a stop to it. It's time to protect prime farmland in source water regions. And that's one of the things that is driving me to work so hard to become Ontario's first Green MPP and get elected as well. And I just want to make a couple comments about that in closing. You know, a lot of people said, can one voice really make a difference when Elizabeth May is elected? And I think without a doubt, Elizabeth May has shown how effective even one Green voice in Ottawa can be. She's been voted Parliamentarian of the Year her first year in Ottawa, and hardest working MP of the Year her second year in Ottawa. And in the same way Elizabeth has been such an inspiring voice for change in Ottawa, I want to be that same voice at Queen's Park. And so with your help, I know we can do it. And so together, and this isn't just about, the same way it wasn't just about Elizabeth getting elected, this is about me getting elected. I always tell people that, you know, if it was about getting me elected, I would run for another party. You know, like seriously, like really? Like there's a much easier path to election than one So it's not about just getting elected for the sake of getting elected. It's about getting elected to be a voice for change. Because I don't know if anyone in this, does anyone in this room really think the political status quo is working? Are we really making the decisions to create the future that you want? And so that's what we need a green voice for. That's what I'm going to be fighting for. And that's what collectively we together are going to accomplish as a team. So thank you for your support. Thank you for your support for Miles. Thank you for your support for the Green Party. But most of all, thank you for the support you're providing our children and grandchildren in the next 7 generations. Because they need us to be good stewards of this earth. Thank you.